I heard her voice before I saw her face. It was the third evening of the Midwinter Council, and I had spent the day listening to land disputes from 4 border clans, each convinced their creek line mattered more than the next man's cattle. My patience, never abundant, had worn through by supper. I left the great hall early and walked the north corridor alone, the long stone passage that runs behind the kitchens, where no council lord thinks to follow a king. That was where I heard it. She was speaking to one of my stable hands, a boy named Fen who was maybe 15, and prone to leaving tasks half-finished. Her voice was low and unhurried, not scolding him, explaining something. How to layer the winter grain so the sick mare at the end stall could eat without the stronger horses crowding her. Practical, patient, the kind of voice that had clearly done this before, many times, and never thought it remarkable. I stopped walking. I told myself I stopped because the corridor was dark and I did not want to startle a stranger. That was true enough. But the fuller truth is that her voice caught in my chest the way a key catches when the lock has been waiting. Not with force, but with a quiet, unmistakable fit. I stood there in the shadow of a stone pillar and listened to her tell Fen to cut the grain measure in thirds, and I felt something I had not felt in years. I wanted to stay near whatever that voice belonged to. She came around the stall partition a moment later and saw me. She did not shriek or stumble. She went still, looked at me steadily and said, "My lord, I did not know the corridor was occupied." A beat. Nor did I know the stable was off limits at dusk. "If it is, I'll go." She was perhaps 24. Brown traveling cloak, worn at the hem. Dark hair pulled back plainly. A packmark on her left wrist, the Ashbourne clan's double band. But it was half covered by the cuff of her sleeve, the way a person covers something they'd rather not explain. She met my eyes without dropping them. Not bold, just steady, the way a woman is steady when she has already passed through something that would have shaken another person to pieces. I told her the stable was not off limits. I asked what brought her to Varenhold in the 3rd week of frost. She answered simply. She said her clan had arranged her marriage to a man named Cowan Dresh. She had refused. Her family had held a gathering before the whole Ashbourne Council and formally cut her name from the clan rolls. She had left with what she could carry. She said it the way you report a road condition. Not bitterly, not asking for pity. Just facts, offered because I had asked. "Where are you going?" I asked. "I have not decided," she said. "I knew a midwife at Varenhold 8 years ago. I thought she might need a second pair of hands." The midwife she named had left my hold 3 winters prior, relocated south with her daughter's family. I told her so. She absorbed this without flinching. Then she looked around the stable, at Fen frozen at his post, at the sick mare in the last stall, and she said, "Well, the mare needs the grain measure changed before morning, whatever else." I stood there and watched her turn back to the stall and finish what she had started. Her name was Lyra of the Ashbourne. She was a healer by training, a midwife's apprentice since she was 13, a bone setter and fever watcher and quiet mender of things that had come apart. She had come to my hold with nothing, no clan, no standing, no name that carried weight, and she moved through my stable as though she were in her own kitchen. I went back to the great hall and told my steward, Halvard, to find her a room in the east wing. Halvard blinked. "Is she a guest of the council, my lord?" "She is a guest," I said. "Of mine." And I left it at that. She stayed. The midwife was gone, but there was work for her anyway. There was always work in a hold this size in winter. A wolf with a torn shoulder who had not let anyone touch it in a week. 3 children in the lower court with the slow fever. A kitchen hand who had lost feeling in 2 fingers from frostbite. Lyra moved through each of these without fanfare. She asked my steward where she was needed, and she went there. She did not ask for payment, but I told Halvard to provide it, and he did. The wolf with the torn shoulder had let no one near it for 7 days. 3 of my wolf keepers had tried and come away with their hands intact only because they knew how to back away from a wounded animal slowly. Lyra spent 20 minutes in the wolf yard simply sitting near it on an overturned bucket, doing nothing at all. No approach, no instruments, no tincture jar opened in its sight. Just sitting, patient as stone, until the wolf had decided she was not a threat but a presence it could measure and account for. On the 21st minute it came to her. Halvard watched from the doorway and then came to find me in my study. He said, "The healer has the torn shoulder wolf in hand, my lord," in the tone of a man reporting something he has witnessed but cannot fully explain. By the fourth day, I found reasons to be in whatever corridor she was in. I told myself this was practical. The hold's healer had retired in autumn, and I had not yet sent for a replacement. I was checking on the welfare of my people. That was what I told myself. But the truth was simpler and more difficult than that. I had run a wolf-pack kingdom for 14 years, and I knew how to read what was in a room. Who carried authority, who was afraid, who was performing, who was real. I had rarely met anyone who was as simply, completely real as this woman who had arrived in my stable with nothing, and set immediately to making things better. She did not posture. She did not explain herself or advertise her competence. She simply saw what was needed and did it. And the world around her quieted wherever she walked, the way storms stop at the edge of a particular kind of shelter. I noticed it first with the children. The 3 small ones in the lower court who had the slow fever, the children of 2 of my craftsmen, had been fretful and sleepless for a week. Healers had treated the fever well enough, but the children remained unsettled, as children do when they have been sick long enough to be afraid of it. Lyra sat with each of them for a long time after their medicine was given. She did not fill the silence with reassurances they could not fully believe. She told them things, small factual things about the hold, about where the snow went in spring, about how the wolves in the yard had names and particular habits. Her voice did what her voice always did, and within an hour each child had gone to sleep without protest. The craftsmen's wives told Halvard, who told me. I stood in the courtyard and thought about a woman who had been disowned 11 days ago and who had, in the time since, set a mare's feeding right, cleaned an infected shoulder wound, cured frostbitten fingers, and sung 3 fevered children to sleep. On the 5th evening, one of my elder wolves, Bren, a broad-shouldered animal who had been with me for 11 years, came home from the forest with a wound along his left foreleg. He had caught it on wire hidden under the snow, and the cut had begun to fester. My wolf-keeper put ointment on it, but Bren would not settle. He paced the wolf yard all night, unable to sleep on the leg. In the morning I brought Lyra. She came without hesitation. Bren was twice her size, and he watched her approach with yellow eyes that had unnerved grown men. She did not rush him. She crouched at the edge of his range and held out one hand, palm up, and waited. She said nothing, just waited. After a long moment, Bren crossed the distance to her. She ran her fingers along the wound carefully. Bren stood still, not just tolerant of her handling, but settled in a way I had not seen all morning. She cleaned the wound with the tincture she carried in the bag at her side, repacked the damaged tissue, and wrapped it tightly enough to hold without restricting the leg. Then she sat back on her heels and scratched Bren behind his ear with a matter-of-factness that made him lean into her palm like a pup. I was watching from the gate. That was when it happened. She glanced back to check her tincture bottle and caught me watching, and in the moment before she looked away, the mate bond struck, not a slow warmth this time, not just a voice catching in a corridor. This was an unmistakable, full-weight recognition that moved from my chest to the back of my jaw, the way a bell finishes ringing, and you realize the note was the one you had been waiting for, without knowing you were waiting. My wolf rose in my chest, not with aggression, with something older and quieter than that. She said, "His leg should be clean by morning, my lord." I said, "Thank you." That was all. But something had shifted in the still winter air, and I think she felt it too, because she looked at me for a moment with the same steadiness she always had, and then she looked at Bren once more, and there was a faint flush at the edge of her cheek that had not been there before. That evening I told Halvard to clear my schedule the next morning. I found her in the East Wing corridor before breakfast, carrying a tray of supplies to the lower court's sick room. I fell into step beside her. She did not ask why. We walked together and I took the heavier supply bag from her without ceremony, and she did not protest, only adjusted the tray and kept moving. "You were trained by a midwife from childhood," I said. "From 13, she said. Marin Solda, out of the Grey Vein settlement. You chose that work." She was quiet for a moment. My mother said I could not sit still around a hurt thing. She meant it as a complaint. A pause. It became a skill. I looked at her sideways. She was watching the corridor ahead, thinking about the sick room, or the fever cases, or something equally practical. "Cowan Dresch," I said. The name sat poorly in my mouth. "What reason did your family give for the arrangement?" They gave several. She was matter-of-fact. His holdings border ours. The alliance would secure the Ashbourne's eastern trade routes. He is wealthy, he has wanted a younger wife for some time. And the reason you refused? She was quiet for another beat. I have said enough broken things back together to know what it looks like when a man believes his wife is something he purchased. I did not want to spend my life being careful not to scratch. She glanced at me. My father believed I was being sentimental. He believed wrong, I said. She looked at me again, a longer look this time. Then she pushed open the sickroom door and went in, and I stood in the corridor for a moment with the supply bag and let the words settle where they had landed. I called for a full accounting of the Ashbourne clan that afternoon. Halvard brought it. A mid-ranking border pack, 40-some families, 3 generations in the Eastern Territories. Their alpha, a man named Arveth, her father. Her brother Corvin, who served as the clan's second. They had cut Lyra's name from their rolls on the 11th day of midwinter, in the clan hall, before all 40 families. The record was brief and official and final, the way these records always were. I read it twice. Then I set it down. I had run this kingdom long enough to understand what it cost a woman to walk out of the only world she had known, carrying one bag, in the 3rd week of winter, with nowhere particular to go. To do it without bitterness, without pleading, without crumbling into the first sympathetic ear, and to arrive at a stranger's stable and immediately ask what the mare needed. I closed the ledger. On the 8th night of her stay, I walked to the East Wing after the last council session and knocked on her door. She opened it. She was in her traveling coat but not dressed to leave. She had been reviewing her supply list by candlelight, and she held a small tally sheet in one hand. "I want to ask you something," I said. She stepped back to let me in. I came in and stood by the window because the room was small and the distance felt correct. I said, "I am going to tell you something that will sound sudden. I don't think you are a woman who has much patience for things phrased gently that should be said directly." She considered me. "I'm listening." "I believe you are my fated mate." I watched her face. "I have felt the bond since the second day you were here. It became certain this morning in the wolf yard. I am not a man who mistakes this kind of thing, and I am not telling you as a command or an expectation. I am telling you because you deserve to be told plainly, and because whatever comes next should be your choice." She was very still. I said, "You owe me nothing. You are welcome here whether you wish to pursue this or not. I am not offering you shelter as a negotiation." She looked down at the tally sheet in her hand. She turned it over once. Then she looked up at me and said, "I have heard the bond described as something that overtakes people, as though they have no choice in it." "Some describe it that way," I said. "I prefer not to be overtaken." A pause. "I also prefer not to be lied to about something this significant." She held my gaze. "Are you lying?" "No." She was quiet for a long moment. I felt something in the wolf yard too. I did not know what to name it. "Now you do," I said. She stood at the center of her small borrowed room with her tally sheet and her worn cloak and the stub of candlelight behind her, and she said, "I would like more time. Not because I doubt you. Because I would like to know you past 8 days." "That is sensible," I said. "You are not offended?" "Lyra," I said, and her name in my mouth landed differently than I expected, like something that had been there a long time, waiting to be said. I did not get where I am by confusing impatience with wisdom. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough. I gave her time. We had 2 more weeks of midwinter council, and I found reasons to work near her every day without making her feel watched or cornered. We sat together at the morning briefings she had asked to attend, because she wanted to understand the territorial disputes affecting the Eastern Healer settlements. It was practical knowledge for someone who planned to work in those territories, she said, and I could not argue with the logic. She listened to the council lords with the same careful attention she gave everything, and once, when Halvard was summarizing a water dispute in the Greyfen Valley, she asked a single quiet question about where the settlement's nearest clean stream ran in winter. The question reframed the whole argument. 2 lords who had been circling the issue for an hour stared at her. Halvard looked at me. I kept my expression even. She was unsurprised by their reaction and went back to her notes. In the evenings we walked the wolf yard together, because Bren had decided she was his personal physician and would not be moved on the point. He stationed himself outside the East Wing corridor every evening until she appeared, and when she did, he fell into step at her left side with the proprietary air of an animal who had made a decision about someone and expected the world to arrange itself accordingly. She did not find this remarkable. She scratched behind his ears as she walked and talked to him the same way she talked to everyone, directly, as though the question of whether he understood was secondary to the fact that she had something worth saying. I watched them from a few paces behind, telling myself I was walking for the air. She asked me questions about the hold, the water system, the pack's midwinter food stores, the condition of the outlying settlements in the Grey Fen Valley. She asked with genuine curiosity, and she listened to the answers the way she listened to everything, steadily, storing each piece. She had a practical mind that ran toward problem-solving the way water runs toward the lowest point. It was not ambition, it was just the shape of how she thought. And it was one of the most restful kinds of intelligence I had encountered in many years of listening to men who performed their thinking for an audience. On the 12th day, she came to find me. I was in the map room with Halvard, going over the trade route ledgers for the spring season. She knocked. Halvard opened the door and she said, "I would like a word with the Alpha King when he has a moment." Halvard looked at me. I nodded and he stepped out. She came in and stood across the table from me. She said, "I have spent 12 days watching how you run this hold, the way you treat your people, the way you listen to the Grey Vein Settlement's water complaint, even though it had nothing to do with the council agenda. The way Bren trusts you." She folded her hands in front of her. "I would like to stay. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I would have found somewhere. Because I want to be here. Because I think this is real." She met my eyes. "If you still want that." I stepped around the table. I took her right hand carefully in both of mine and turned it over. The mate mark had begun to form on her wrist over the past several days. A faint silver line, barely visible, but unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. I placed my own wrist beside hers. The marks were identical in pattern, the same fine interlocking lines that the old Moonseer texts described as two halves of a single seal. Never wrong, never arbitrary. Mine had finished forming on the 3rd day. Hers had been growing since the Wolfyard morning. She studied them for a long moment, then she reached out with her free hand and touched the mark on my wrist with 2 fingertips. Not testing it, not uncertain. Just making it real. Acknowledging what was already there. "I do still want that," I said. The mark blazed once, both of ours, together. A single pulse of silver light that lit the map table between us, and then settled, steady and warm, and did not go out. I did not kiss her in the map room. I gave her my arm instead, the way you offer shelter rather than ceremony, and she took it, and we walked out into the hall together. Halvard, waiting just outside, took one look at our wrists and said nothing at all, only bowed his head. It was her father who forced the public declaration sooner than I had intended. Word had reached the Ashbourne clan. It was not difficult to find out where a disowned daughter had gone, once someone thought to ask. Arveth arrived at Varenhold's gate on the 14th day with her brother Corvin and 2 of the clan's council elders. They had not sent word ahead. They presented themselves at the gate and told my watch that they had come to collect a family matter. I was informed within the hour. I let them wait in the outer hall while I sent word to Lyra. She came to me in the great hall, where I had assembled my senior council and 3 of my elder wolves. She stood beside me and she did not look afraid. She looked at the door through which her family would enter, and her face was the same face she had shown Bren on the first morning. Composed, prepared, ready for whatever needed to be done. Her father came in first. Arveth was a broad-shouldered man with the Ashbourne double band on both wrists, a man who had clearly carried authority easily and expected it to travel with him. He looked at Lyra. He looked at me. He made a rapid assessment of what he saw, and he recalibrated his approach in the moment. I watched him do it. He was not a stupid man. He was a man who had made a decision without full information, and he was now standing in a great hall that showed him exactly what that decision had cost. "Alpha King," he said, "I apologize for the manner of our arrival. We received word that our daughter was here. We have come to resolve the family matter that caused her to leave." I said, "Lyra of the Ashbourne is a guest of Varenhold, and is free to go or stay as she wishes. What is the matter you mean to resolve?" Corvan, who was younger and less careful, said, "She violated her family's arrangement. Lord Dresh is willing to be patient, but the Ashbourne clan cannot leave the contract in default indefinitely. She owes her family an explanation and a decision. Lyra said, I gave you both. You chose not to receive them. Her voice was even. No anger in it. Just the same steadiness she put in everything. Corvin's jaw tightened. Lyra, you are in no position. She is, I said. In the position of standing beside me in my own hall. My voice did not rise. And she is in the further position of bearing my mate mark. Both positions supersede any contract your clan entered without her consent. The outer hall went very quiet. Arvith's eyes dropped to her wrist. He saw the silver mark, fully formed now, bright even in the hall's winter light. He looked at his son. He looked back at me. I said, your family struck her name from your rolls on the 11th of midwinter. That decision stands as yours. I do not undo other packs' internal choices. What I will tell you plainly is this. Lyra is not available to be collected. She is not a matter to be resolved. She is my fated mate, and she has chosen to stand here. Whatever arrangement Lord Dresh believed he had entered is dissolved as of this moment. I looked at Arvith directly. If you wish to mend what your family broke with her, that conversation belongs to her, not to me. She can choose to have it or not. But you did not come here to mend anything. You came here to retrieve. And she is not retrievable. Arvith was silent for a long time. He looked at his daughter. Lyra stood with her hands at her sides and met her father's gaze with that steadiness she carried everywhere. She did not look at me for help. She did not look away from him. She simply stood in herself and let him see her clearly. The woman he had overlooked and undervalued, standing in the great hall of the Northern Kingdom's Alpha King, bearing the mate mark on her wrist. I had called her unmistakable from the first night in the stable. I thought of how long she had been unmistakable in her father's own house, and how he had chosen not to see it. Arvith, for the first time since he had walked in, looked like a man who understood the full weight of a decision he had already made. He bent his head. It was not a formal bow, not the pack's ceremony bow, not a submission. It was something quieter and perhaps more difficult than that. A father who had been wrong about what his daughter was worth, looking at the proof of it, and finding no argument left to make. Corvin followed his father's lead. The two council elders behind them stood in silence. I see, Arvith said quietly, to Lyra, not to me. I see that I was mistaken. Lyra said nothing for a moment. Then she said, I know. 2 words, plainly, not coldly. She did not comfort him, but she did not wound him further. She simply told him the truth and left him to carry it. They left that evening without the contract and without their daughter. The gate closed behind them. Later, after the hall had cleared and my council had dispersed, Lyra and I sat in the east wing corridor outside her room, the same corridor where she had told Fen about the mayor's grain measure, the place where I had first heard her voice. We sat on the stone bench by the north-facing window and watched the frost collect on the outside glass. She said, My father has never bent his head to anyone in my memory. He loves you, I think, I said. He was wrong about how to show it. She considered that. Perhaps. A pause. It doesn't undo what was done. No, I said, but it can be the beginning of something else, if you want it to be. Later, when you are ready. She looked at me sideways. You are surprisingly patient for a man they call the Iron Warden of the North. I had not expected that. Where did you hear that? Halvord, the corner of her mouth moved. He has been quietly educating me. I looked at the frost on the window glass. I am patient, I said, with things that matter. She was quiet for a while after that. The corridor was cold, and Bren had appeared from somewhere in the wing and settled himself across both our feet with the serene authority of an animal who has decided how things are going to be. She reached down and laid one hand on his flank without looking, the way you reach for something familiar. Then she said, Fen told me today that the mayor is eating properly. He seemed very pleased with himself. He did well with the grain measure. He did, she agreed, though he still cannot remember to latch the feed room door. I have told him twice. He nods very sincerely and then forgets within the hour. He is 15, I said. Sincerity and memory are not yet reliably connected at 15. She considered this seriously, as she considered everything. That is fair. I shall tell him a 3rd time. I told her I would speak to him about it. She said she had already spoken to him about it herself, and that my speaking to him a 2nd time would only confuse the matter of who was actually responsible for the horses. We sat there in the cold corridor for a long time, talking about nothing that was large or ceremonial. The mayor, the supply list for the lower court, the question of whether the eastern settlement trail would be passable by spring, the particular way Bren sulked when his evening walk was delayed. Small things, real things, the kind of things that fill a life between all the moments that are supposed to matter. Her wrist rested on the bench between us, the silver mark steady in the candlelight. Mine rested beside it. The marks had settled now, not blazing, just present, the way a candle burns quiet and sure after the first striking. I said, eventually, you asked me for more time. I did. Has there been enough of it? She looked at our wrists for a moment, then up at the frosted window, then at me, and for the first time since I had known her, she did not look like a woman braced for the next thing she would have to endure. She looked like a woman who had arrived somewhere she had not expected, and found it right. I think, she said carefully, that time is not really the thing I was asking for. What were you asking for? To be known, she said, before anything was decided, to be known by the person deciding. I looked at her, at the worn hem of her cloak, at the tally sheet she had folded into her coat pocket without noticing, at the dark hair and the steady eyes, and the hands that had put Bren's leg to rights, and fixed the mare's grain measure, and set the lower court's fever children sleeping, because she could not sit still around a hurt thing. She had been known to her father for 24 years, and he had not seen her. She had been cast out for refusing a man who would have known her even less. She had walked into winter with one bag and a destination that no longer existed, and she had stopped at the first place where she could be of use. Then you have it, I said, fully, without condition. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she gave me the fullest version of that almost smile I had been watching build for 2 weeks, real and warm and without reservation. Bren shifted his weight across our feet, announced by a long exhale that suggested all of this was very satisfactory from his perspective. Outside, the frost went on collecting on the glass. The corridor held the quiet that comes after something important has been said and does not need to be repeated. She was known to me, I to her. The hold around us was still and bright with cold, and the mate marks on our wrists burned not with the wild urgency of something new, but with the settled certainty of something that had always been true and was only now finally, completely named. I had opened my door to a woman who had nowhere to go. She had brought with her, in one worn bag, everything that mattered, and the hold that had been cold and half-empty in all the ways a hall can be those things, had, without ceremony, begun to feel like home. In the spring, I would formally receive her before the whole Varen pack. There would be ceremony and witness and the formal exchange of the Alpha's vow. All of that would come. But those things were shaped from the outside, by tradition and by the pack's need to name what it saw. What was true between us had already been named, quietly, in a cold corridor, with a wolf asleep across our feet, and frost on the glass, and nothing more than honesty between us. It was more than enough. It had always been enough. I had only needed to open the door to find it.